my name is Marco Bianchi, and my project is on the public finance of sports stadiums. Sports stadiums used to have more favorable lease contracts set up between themselves and franchise owners. However, over the years, sports have become a booming business with ever-growing popularity. As sports ownership has become more business-oriented and owners have attained an acuity over the effects of market demographics on revenue, they have become aware of their opportunity costs. In light of these opportunity costs, perhaps the first shocking sports franchise to move was of the Brooklyn Dodgers to Los Angeles. Art Modell also joined the list of notorious owners to move their franchises when he uprooted Cleveland's beloved Browns for Baltimore. This, of course, was to fill the void created when Rob Irsay took his Colts and moved them to fill the newly constructed Dome Stadium in Indianapolis. These examples show the evolution and epitomize the landscape of sports franchise owners' leverage over their cities, essentially through the threat to leave. In the pursuit of increased profits, it seems owners have a penchant for undertaking the construction of more elaborate stadiums for their sports franchises. Together, we will explore the financing of these elaborate sandcastles. Before getting into the different methods of finance, perhaps it is most appropriate to ask, why the need for such elaborate stadiums? Sports franchise owners believe that these meccas are the key to achieving profitable teams, and thus, they will argue, will be able to field competitive teams. Throughout sports, luxury boxes play an enormous role in revenue generation for the owners, as any revenue generated through the sale of these luxury boxes don't have to be shared through revenue sharing programs. Aside from the arguments of being able to field better teams, owners and others with vested interests in seeing the construction of new stadiums will also claim that they will generate new money in the market. This proclamation rests on the economic principles of net exports and positive externalities. Essentially, the money from tourists and excitement from having a professional sports team in town will create an economic boon. In the book Public Dollars, Private Stadium, The Battle Over Building Sports Stadiums, it is mentioned that this assertion of ancillary economic activity is incorrect. In fact, a particular study cited in the book reveals that new stadiums could even have a negative effect, effectively acting as a black hole of economic activity, taking away what might have been spent elsewhere. The creation of new jobs is also a popular proclamation, as the construction of the new stadiums will require lots of labor. As well as upon completion, the stadium will employ many to clean, serve concessions, sell paraphernalia, ticket sales. However, the article, Playing the Stadium Game, Financing Professional Sports Facilities in the 90s, calls into question the quality of many of these created jobs, and adds the caveat, if the same amount of investment was placed in another business, it may contribute as much, if not more, than that of the stadium. Finally, advocates also claim intangible factors will surface. This could be their greatest claim. Qualities such as community pride and the joy in having a home team could be very powerful, but, as we will see later, can still be called into question. The first category we will explore is having the public float the bill. This can be achieved through a couple common methods. The most notorious method is through bonds. An interesting fact about using bonds is the interest that is generated by their issuance. Once issued, the borrower needs to not only pay the face value of the bond, but also the interest payments that coincide with the bond. Conveniently, these interest payments are ignored when the cost of construction of a new stadium is portrayed. Even more interesting and devious plot is franchise owners like to go after municipal bonds because they are tax exempt. In the book Field of Schemes, How the Great Stadium Swindle Turns Public Money into Private Profit, states that since bond buyers don't have to pay taxes on their income from these bonds, municipalities can sell them at lower rates, thus further reducing the cost of the new stadium. The intention of these bonds was for roads and other public works, not for private profit. Congress, catching on to the scheme, eliminated this subsidy as part of the Tax Reform Act of 1986, effectively labeling sports construction as private activity. The book Field of Schemes, interestingly, points out that getting rid of the tax-exempt bonds might actually hurt cities, because eliminating the tax-deductible status won't have the effect intended, in that municipalities will still pay for the construction. The only difference is that now they will have to use taxable bonds by law and thus have to endure higher interest rates, making costly stadiums cost even more. Another method of financing is to have the fans pay. In this, at least the cost of the stadiums are matched with those who stand to benefit from its existence. Differing methods are used to usurp money from fans. Some might charge a parking tax. Ticket surcharges are also useful. The most interesting of these methods may be the personal seat license, or PSL. Using a PSL, teams make fans pay a fee just for the right to purchase season tickets. If the license fee is paid for, but no tickets purchased, then the license is forfeit to the next willing purchaser. As evidenced by Table 7.1 in the Economics of Sports, 5th edition, stadium owners do help pay for their stadiums, albeit not very much. In some circumstances, there are targeted beneficiaries for securing revenue streams to cover stadium costs. Charging a tourist tax on hotel revenues is one way to try to come up with the cost. The economic logic behind this is to try to displace the cost of the stadium on those who come from out of town. Local bars and restaurants can also be charged a tax, as the economic theory is that they experience the positive externalities that sports stadiums create. However, as previously mentioned, there is great evidence and plenty of research to suggest no positive externality exists. It would seem that sports franchise owners really get to have their cake and eat it too, meaning they get the public to take on the risk of paying the high cost of stadiums, which brings in new revenue for the private owner, drastically increasing their wealth. This is perhaps best exemplified in Build It and They Will Come. Do taxpayer-financed sports stadiums, convention centers, and hotels deliver as promised for America's cities? As they tell of George W. Bush and the Texas Rangers. George W. Bush bought his ownership share of the Rangers for $600,000 in 1989. After a two-thirds public subsidy for a $191 million stadium, George W. Bush and his investors sold the franchise for $250 million. George Bush came away from the deal making a profit of $14.9 million, essentially reaping private profit from the benefits the public endowed the franchise with through subsidy. In the book Public Dollars, Private Stadiums, the authors mention Stephen Lukes, the developer of a useful model for understanding social power. They refer to local growth coalitions, or essentially, local business leaders who collude with public figures to get legislation passed that will use public funding to benefit private interests. Local growth coalitions, the authors discovered, are a systemic force behind the flow of public funds for private stadiums. Stephen Lukes describes how their power operates in three distinct dimensions. Ostensible power is the first dimension, or the power that the public can perceive. It is the power that takes place in public arenas, such as town halls, ordinances, laws, debates, all things that seem to represent public interest. The second dimension represents, essentially, the collusion between public officials and private interest groups, or what could be thought of as lobbying. Probably the most interesting of the three powers is the third power, or subconscious power. Lukes refers to the subconscious power as society's dominant ideology. What this essentially gets at is society's acceptance that public dollars are used to fund large private businesses simply because this is what the paradigm has been. This systemic acceptance is ingrained in the public's conscience, making them feel as though this is just the way these matters are handled, and is an extremely powerful force that is in favor of private ownership receiving public subsidy. The authors find that the stronger an area's local growth coalition, the more apt they are to get the public funding they desire, and they assert, when pursuing publicly financed sports stadiums, local growth coalitions operate simultaneously in the second and third dimensions of power. The first category we will explore is having the public float the bill. This can be achieved through a couple common methods. The most notorious method is through bonds. An interesting fact about using bonds is the interest that is generated by their issuance. Once issued, the borrower needs to not only pay the face value of the bond, but also the interest payments that coincide with the bond. Conveniently, these interest payments are ignored when the cost of construction of a new stadium is portrayed. Even more
First is Joy's
interesting
home,
and
a
devious
woman
plot
living in the
is
Bronx
franchise
who saw the
owners like to go
destruction of a
after
valued
municipal
community
bonds
park to clear
because
way
they are
for a
tax
parking
exempt.
garage for the
In the
new
book
Yankee
Field of
Stadium.
Schemes, How the Great
In her
Stadium
testimony,
Swindle Turns
she
Public
speaks of a
Money into
process
Private
that was
Profit,
arbitrary and
states that
capricious,
since bond buyers
seeming to fit
don't have to
Luke's
pay
model of
taxes
local
on their
growth
income from
relations.
these bonds,
As she recalls, the New York
municipalities can
City
sell them at
Department of
lower
Parks and
rates,
Recreation
thus further
allowed the
reducing the
redevelopment of
cost
a
of
new
the new
Yankee
stadium.
Stadium on portions
The
of parks
intention of these
adjacent to the
bonds was for
current
roads
stadium,
and other public
which is
works,
still big
not for
enough to
private
house a
profit.
baseball team.
Congress, catching on to the scheme, eliminated this subsidy
She
as
tells
part
of
of the
how the
Tax
New
Reform
York
Act
state
of
legislators removed
1986,
protections,
effectively
ensuring that their
labeling
beloved
sports
park would
construction
remain
as private
undeveloped in
activity.
perpetuity.
The book
Public
Field of
officials
Schemes,
decided it was in their
interestingly, points
community's
out that
best
getting rid of
interest
the
to offer a
tax-exempt
parcel of
bonds
land
might
to
actually hurt
expand the
cities
wealth of private
because
interest.
eliminating the tax-deductible status
Legislators
won't
made
have
no
the
effort
effect
to
intended,
inform the community
in that
that these
municipalities will
protections
still
would
pay
be
for the
removed.
construction.
And when it
The
did
only
get out,
difference is
the
that
media
now
was overly
they will have
enamored
to
with
use
the new
taxable
Yankee
bonds
Stadium project,
by law and
as
thus have
top
to
public
endure higher
relations
interest
people were
rates,
hired to sway
making
motions to
costly
their side.
stadiums cost even more.
In the end, her park, among others, and over 400 trees were mowed down to clear the way for a new Yankee Stadium and 4 parking garages. She tells of how they thought the National Park Service would help her and the surrounding community. They found out that the National Park Service had been colluding with the city, state, and the Yankees all before anyone in the community knew what was to be the fate of their parks. Perhaps this disconnect between the construction of new stadiums and public interest is most poignant in the statement of Frank Rashid, who retells the story of the construction of Comerica Park in Detroit. After years of fighting, he and a group he started to save Tiger Stadium lost. He says cynically, "Detroit must close 30 public schools, but we have 2 stadiums. We have shut down several public library branches and restricted hours in those that remain. We have few organized little leagues. We can't maintain parks and playgrounds for children, but we have 2 stadiums for big leagues and their millionaire athletes. Detroiters have to report accidents and crimes at police precincts, and we must travel further now to do so, since the police departments have replaced 15 neighborhood precincts with 6 centralized districts. Our mayor proposes day off without pay for city workers, including fire and emergency responder, and curtails trash pickups. But the 2 new stadiums receive plenty of police protection, and their trash always gets collected. We call animal control and get no answer. We report a dangerous building and get placed on hold. We call 911 and get a busy signal. We pay the highest millage rate of any municipality in southeast Michigan. We can't afford enough emergency workers and phone lines, but we have 2 new stadiums. Detroit needs solutions that would come from comprehensive urban policy that equitably distributes resources and opportunities. We can list strategies that would strengthen our city and improve our quality of life. 2 new stadiums are not on this list. We have gone over the public financing of sports stadiums. We learned why owners want to build new stadiums, what they promise the public, and some different methods of eliciting money from the public. We learned of a private owner growing wealthy off the public subsidy of a sports stadium, and discovered some reasons why this behavior happens and continues to happen. Finally, we went over testimony of 2 individuals before a subcommittee of the House of Representatives on their debacle and misfortunes that were the direct result of the construction of new sports stadiums. Constructing sports stadiums with public money does not make sense. The economic benefits that are theorized by advocates do not show up in the real world. Economic analysis shows this time and time again. Not only does research show that it doesn't create positive economic effects, there are living people just like you and me who attest to the destruction or the indifference the existence of a sports stadium has on a community.